Turn this on, and we're going to get going now. This mic should help us make sure we can keep it. Okay. So my name is Andrew Wilkes. I know this probably feels a little, maybe excessively formal to have a mic whenever I can hear my voice without the aid of the microphone. But this is to help make sure the sound comes clearly into the Zoom mechanism. So I'm Andrew Wilkes. I'm the Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy for Generation Citizen. And we are delighted to have John King with us for Fireside Chat, an intimate conversation to get, I'm sure, your busy mornings going in DC with an energizing conversation around civics, including Action Civics, but also other approaches to experiential civics education as well. Just by way of introduction, and I'm sure you can introduce yourself, but John King joins us as no stranger to this space in his capacity as President and CEO of the Education Trust, as well as the 10th, I believe, is U.S. Secretary of Education. He was a staunch champion for civics education, so it's a real delight to have you with us. Just in terms of format and flow, we'll start off the conversation with a few questions between us, and then after that, we'll kind of spiral it out so we can have the fireside chat and the kind of intimate exchange that you might associate with the name. Before we get going, I just want to point out why you have these cards before you. There's a card on each person's seat that greeted you. And this is a part of our Beyond the Ballot campaign that we've done and continue to do at Generation Citizen, which is simply a recognition that in addition to voting as one key form of civic participation, there are other forms that are pillars of civic action. Things like writing an op-ed, attending a public meeting, things such as hosting a political gathering across party lines to talk about whatever issues concern our attention. So we just have those as a postcard of sorts that you can hold for you or for someone you love in a civic sort of way. So again, thank you all for being here. And I'm going to give it to you to make whatever open remarks you might like to share. Then we'll have to do.
Sure. Do you want to have folks introduce themselves or no?
Let's do that. Let's do introductions, and in the interest of both time and collegiality, I'm going to ask you to say your name and the organization that you're with. Can we flow that way? All right, wonderful. So we'll start with you.
I'm Robin Lingo, and I run Make the Challenge DC.
I'm Lisa Matthews with the National Conference on Citizenship.
I'm Mike Hansen. I'm at the Brown Center on Education Policy at Brookings.
I'm Dana Quintero. I'm at the Brown Center.
Derek Somerville with the YMCA.
Madeline Dardo, Alabama House Democratic Caucus.
Sabrina Zant, Religious Freedom Center, Freedom Forum Institute.
Just Ragazzi, America Indivisible.
Jimmy Higdon, Kentucky State Senate.
Jennifer Lerner, Baskin Institute.
Ernest Logan, American Federation of School Administrators, AFL-CIO.
Aisha Boya, Edelman.
Good morning, Larry Pasca, National Council for the Social Studies.
Good morning, I'm Jamie Coppell from the Communities for Just Schools Fund.
Well, good morning, everybody. It is good to see old friends, new friends, and certainly this is a topic where probably very little I can tell you about this topic that you don't already know. I would say, you know, there's something nice about preaching to the choir, at least for the reverend, right? I'll just say a couple words to start, and I'm just really looking forward to the conversation. So I sent my daughter off to school, my sophomore daughter, 15. Sent her off to school this morning. She's all dressed up because she is a lawyer in a reenactment of the BuzzFeed dossier case. And so I was thinking about that as I came down here this morning, and the way in which, to her, she's not thinking about that as civics education. She's thinking about that as this really fun project that she's doing with her class. And she's a lawyer in the case, and she wants to do a good job. But what her teachers have done in Montgomery County Public Schools is created this environment where hands-on civic learning is built into how they approach learning in the school as a whole. And that, to me, is what our aspiration should be. How do we create school environments where civic learning is embedded throughout the curriculum It's embedded in how we think about extracurricular activities. It's embedded in how we think about the mission of public education. And I actually am pretty optimistic at this moment. There are lots of reasons for people to be pessimistic about the state of our politics, but I see a lot of energy amongst young people around activism and organizing, and a lot of interest in understanding how government works in order to accomplish the things that matter to them. I think that's very promising. Unfortunately, I don't necessarily see as much momentum in schools as I wish we did around civic education and social studies education more broadly. And you all know the data on this. We have less than a quarter of 8th graders who are proficient in social studies. We have only about a quarter of adults in a recent survey who can name the 3 branches of government. We have states that have adopted the civics test as a part of their statewide assessment systems, but the citizenship test is a very, very low bar, right? I mean, that's just kind of fact recall. So there's some good symbolism in that, but it's certainly not sufficient to prepare kids to be truly engaged citizens. We know from data in elementary schools, there's a survey of K-3 teachers that showed K-3 teachers were spending less than 16 minutes a day on social studies, even though we know that learning about social studies, learning about civics will make you a better reader. So we have work to do collectively, I think, to inspire school leaders, school boards, superintendents, legislators, governors around the role that schools could and should play in civic education. So I'm excited about where kids are. We got to do some work on the adults. But that's probably true across a variety of issues.
Wonderful. You mentioned the citizenship test, and one of the things that Mary's mentioned is that Nebraska recently passed a law that folks may be aware of that offers alternative forms of civic competency to the citizenship test. So one of those alternate forms is going to a public meeting and then writing a report to explain what you learned as a result of that process. And so I think a number of folks are recognizing what you said, that the citizenship test is a starting point, but not necessarily the end point. One question for you, Secretary King. What federal education levers, such as SSA plans or other levers, can be pulled, as it were, to place equity and experiential forms of civics like Action Civics at the top of the social studies agenda?
Well, the good news is there were actually a lot of opportunities in ESSA. The bad news is I don't think states have fully taken advantage of those. Right? So the state could have said in their ESSA plans that they would make social studies outcomes a part of their accountability strategy for schools. Very few states did that. States could have said they were going to use Title IV dollars to invest in civic education, social studies education. Very few states did that. States could have said that when they think about college and career readiness, they are also going to talk about citizenship and civic readiness. A few states did that. New York did that, for example, but not many, and not many put much weight behind that kind of commitment. So that's really a missed opportunity. Certainly, as people think about how to improve reading performance, they ought to be thinking about the role of knowledge in reading performance. So you think about a place like Detroit. Detroit recently adopted the expeditionary learning K-8 curriculum as their citywide curriculum. Expeditionary learning curriculum, reading and writing, English language arts curriculum, actually builds in a lot of social studies learning and lots of hands-on opportunities for students to engage with some of the action civics issues that are raised in the text that they read over the course of that curriculum. States could be using this moment to say, hey, if you want to improve your reading performance, you need to adopt a curriculum that is knowledge-rich. And included in that knowledge-rich curriculum needs to be social studies. In addition, I would argue, to science. One interesting example of a state doing that is Louisiana, where they are going to highlight in their assessment system, including some social studies content in their English language arts exam and the literacy exam, on the theory that rather than testing sort of random reading strategies, that part of what you want to do is signal to teachers that there's a set of knowledge, ideas, things students should be exposed to each year, and that will influence how ready they are for the English language arts assessment. And that'll be an interesting opportunity to watch. So lots of opportunities. There's also, separate from the ESSA framework, lots of states have very strong control over what teacher preparation looks like. But my experience in visiting elementary teacher preparation programs around the country is they generally do not do a great job with social studies and civic education. Better at the secondary level, we were getting secondary certification in social studies. But you really need elementary school teachers to set a strong foundation. And I don't think that's happening in a lot of teacher preparation programs. States could lean in.
So you mentioned teacher preparation in addition to the levers that ESSA provides. Currently, there are no less than 7 civics education bills in state colleges across the country. And so curious to hear your thought on how Action Civics can be positioned as central to those conversations.
I think part of what we need to do is help people understand what Action Civics means. I do think particularly in states where legislators are concerned about bias in social studies instruction, concerned that teachers are going to be indoctrinating kids in partisan politics. Action Civics can sometimes sound like, oh, teachers are going to be training kids to go work for the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. And that makes people very anxious. So I think it's helping folks understand what we mean by Action Civics. And I think students are one of the most effective voices for that. I'd much rather have a set of students and teachers talk to legislators than policy wonks like many of us in the room. I think when teachers and students describe things like Model UN, Model Congress, when they describe how in their classroom they are studying a particular problem in their community, like why they're more deaths at a particular corner in car accidents, and then they're figuring out what can be done about that, decides whether or not there's a stoplight. And when kids describe that, it lowers, I think, people's anxiety that what we're talking about is sort of indoctrination campaign. I think when we don't provide that context, people get very anxious, or they boil down their commitment to civics just to knowing some things. Because everyone can agree you should know the Constitution, you should know the branches of government. That's not really Action Civics.
Yeah.
That knowledge is foundational, but I think if people are anxious about the partisan politics, they sometimes will kind of winnow down a commitment just to the knowledge piece. And that's part of what I end up with the citizenship test, because it's very safe.
Yeah.
Right? We got to help build people's comfort level. Legislators, legislative staff.
What do you think? Just a couple more questions and then want to swing it open to everyone. Part of what we've seen, and I imagine many of the folks in the room, I mean, Nicola probably sees this as well, given the work they do on Action Civics also, is that when you position civic knowledge as needing civic participation and civic dispositions to get a well-rounded civic education, that sometimes it's tough to get those on the table as co-equal components of the civics learning experience. What, in your experience, have you seen as successful ways to kind of drive the narrative to create a bit more parity?
Well, the good thing is kids really prefer the hands-on activities, right? So kids are very good spokespeople and very demanding customers. And so if your approach, right, Larry will tell you, right? If your approach to social studies is we're just going to memorize facts and dates for the next 180 days, your students are not going to be very enthusiastic about that course. And so I do think teachers knowing that want good materials. I think about facing history and ourselves. Teachers love those materials. They want those materials because they want the ability to engage their students in a more hands-on approach to learning about social studies. I'm just keep bragging on my daughter. So my daughter also had a project earlier this year, the C-SPAN video contest. Have folks seen this? So C-SPAN is a contest for middle school and high school students to do, sort of 5 to 8 minute video segments on current issues. So my daughter and her classmates did a project on inclusion of students with disabilities. And so they interviewed advocates for students with disabilities, they interviewed teachers and administrators, they interviewed kids, me, and they put together this fantastic 5-minute segment on inclusion. That wasn't necessarily a social studies project or a civics project. It was part of video editing, filmmaking project, but it turned out to teach a whole set of civic engagement skills. I think we have to equip teachers with more of those things. And again, not just in social studies, we need to help the English teacher see how Action Civics could play out in the English classroom around a particular text. We need to help the science teacher see how they're bringing Action Civics dimension to thinking about genetics, right? You're teaching your students about genetics, but then there's all these questions about how will gene science be used going forward, and what are some of the risks for society, and how should we sort through those? That's an Action Civics opportunity. The math teacher teaching probability or teaching statistics, that's a Action Civics opportunity. Right? How do we make sense of polling data, for example? Or how do we think about redistricting, right? Which is really a math problem today because we have such fantastic analytics around likely voting patterns. So getting kids into the conversation about how redistricting should be done is an opportunity for the math teacher. So I think we have, in some ways, a dearth of great content and great training to support teachers across the curriculum. And the result is that some of the best stuff happens in the extracurricular activities, the outside of school activities, but we can do much more to think about how we integrate Action Civics across.
I said one more question. I asked for your mercy and grace. 2 more questions. And then let's go. The first is, I'm wondering how Action Civics can be positioned as an important resource for equity across the board. And I mention that because we're in a moment where not only do you see folks like Generation Citizen and Midfield, a number of other folks doing experiential civics, but the Fordham Institute is also having a conversation around equity. Traditionally, folks may associate the Fordham Institute as being a conservative organization, but there's some level of interest in having this conversation, I think, across the spectrum. So I'm wondering if you can talk about how to frame and situate that in an authentic way that hits the issues, but also brings it into the conversation.
I think one of our problems as a society, we're honest with ourselves, that affluent suburban kids get the good stuff, and low-income kids in cities and rural communities get less of the good stuff. And so to me, the question is, how do you help them get access to the good stuff? One thing we see in high-needs schools is, I think, a significant pedagogical mistake that folks make, which is, we need to boost reading scores, so we're going to stop doing social studies and science. And the result is actually that reading scores get worse, because if you don't know stuff about the world and you don't have a broad vocabulary, you're not going to get better as a reader, no matter how many times I tell you to circle the main idea, right? So we've got to make sure that high-needs schools get the kind of support around social studies education, civic education, that affluent schools are able to provide. 2, we've got to create opportunities in high-needs schools, again, urban and rural, for kids to have AP classes, which we know are often missing. Right? The AP government class, the AP US history class, those can be places where Action Civics can be integrated. We have to make sure that those schools have access to programs like Make Fun and others that are doing hands-on learning. I think one of the things that often happens is cool nonprofits located in cities and don't necessarily reach out to rural communities. And so figuring out how we build the capacity, and it may be organizations like the Y and others that are present in more places. We may want also to think about how we engage folks like FFA, the Future Farmers of America. In the way they do have a slice of Action Civics and have very engaged teachers and students. It could be a tremendous resource. Good thing about that. And then we think about how we, as legislatures, are thinking about resources, how we put resources into high-need schools so that kids can take advantage of some of the same opportunities that affluent kids get. Right? The trip to the state capitol, the trip to DC, the opportunity to participate in debate competitions or mock trial competitions. Again, we just know those are disproportionately available to more affluent kids. We ought to make those same kinds of opportunities available as well.
It's really helpful and instructive. And you talking about organizations that don't always come up in this conversation, like the Future Farmers of America. It's a great segue into the last question of this section before we swing it open. And that's this. Which stakeholders do you think need to be a part of a big tent effort to revive civics education, like a national campaign?
Well, there are folks I'm worried are not often enough at the table. I would say the traditional civil rights community is often not at the table in the conversation about civics. So you think about urban leagues, which have tremendous influence and presence around the country. Think about 10th U.S, or the National Council of La Raza. They have affiliates all over the country. Now, bandwidth is a challenge. If you are running a local affiliate of 10th U.S, you are probably working on 100 issues around immigration or challenges for undocumented students. You're working on economic development issues in the community. You're working on employment. So you not only need to be invited to the table, but you have to get support, right? You have to get, and that's the foundations have to give support, right? You need philanthropic support, but it also needs partners need to come with content, not just ask. And I think what happens for especially local civil rights groups is people want them at the table so they can say they were in the meeting, but then they don't get any benefit. And so, what programs, what resources are we provide? So, traditional civil rights community, I would say the PTA and parents as a resource and engaging parents in this conversation. Because when you ask parents what they want for their kids, participation in the community well-being is an important priority for parents. So how do we bring them into the conversation? There are organizations that are more conservative. It's good that Fordham is engaging on this. But I think thinking about more conservative organizations that care about civic education. A lot of folks around this table were at the Reagan Institute event last year. The Reagan Institute is very committed to civic education. But think about how to make this, when we say that it is nonpartisan, but everybody in the room is a Democrat, that's actually not the meaning of nonpartisan. So we have to make sure that there's sort of ideological diversity, I think, in the community around Action Civics in particular. And then students, how do we lift up student voice? And how do we create space for students to lead in this conversation? And everyone around this table probably knows this, but the Parkland kids, part of what enabled the Parkland kids to be such effective voices on the issues of gun violence, and to turn the trauma that they went through into Action Civics, was that Broward County has a very strong tradition around social studies and civic education. Many of the students who are leaders in the Parkland movement will talk about what they learned in their AP government class about how to lead a movement. And so, how do we equip more young people, like the Parkland students, to have a seat at the table as we talk about Action Civics?
Thank you, that's really helpful. Also want to segue as we move into this portion of the conversation. We conclude deliberately with a conversation around the Big Tent, because you all are a part of that tent here in this very room, each of you, whether at think tanks, representing faith communities, social studies groups, civic education organizations, legislators, union presidents. You each bring something critical to this conversation, including what I imagine are questions for the Fireside Chat. So let's start with you. Could you say your name and organization again, and then lead the question?
Great. Hi again, I'm Yusra Ghazi with America Indivisible, also Senior Fellow at the Religious Freedom Center at the Museum. I'm curious, the last example that you gave of the Parkland students is along the lines of the question I was going to ask. There are the examples you've given earlier about modeling or role-playing civic actions in classrooms and academic settings. I'm wondering if there are ways that there can be a better, stronger bridge between that kind of an experiential opportunity for a young person and actually getting to be involved in the local community in a way that results in social change. So one of the earliest ways that I personally got involved in this space was as a high school student. I was invited to sit on the peer jury at the local village, hall, where I got to decide how many hours of community service to assign peers who had been caught with drugs. So that just made me feel like, wow, I have so much power here. I have so much influence. I can get involved in influencing my community in different ways. And there are some cities and states that have participatory budgeting oriented around young people. So I'm thinking about what bridges there are between the classroom experience and then actually taking advantage of the interest that, for example, the activism of the Parkland students generated to create opportunities for young people, not just to model and role play what those types of activities are, but to actually then be given the ability to make those decisions and be more actively involved.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. And you can do that at multiple levels. There's a school level of how, what kind of student government organization do you create, what opportunities for student voice are there within the school, across the district. So in Montgomery County, we have a student member of the school board who votes on policy issues. Not all policy issues, but a lot of the policy issues. And running that election across all of the schools gets all of the young people engaged. So there's the school level, there's a community level, what you were describing around kind of diversion programs and kind of alternative sentencing strategies. There are ways that the city council or county council can create opportunities, whether it's around the budget or around a particular policy issue, to lift up and create opportunities for student voice. There's internship experiences that folks can create for young people. When I was a high school teacher, one of the courses that I developed was for my seniors, a course called the City Project, where a requirement of the course was to do a community-based internship with a community-based organization, and then to do a sort of a multi-pronged research project kind of on the sociological, political, economic context for the work you were doing with the community-based organization. So I had a student work on a project in Boston where people were illegally dumping in a community called transfer station, basically illegally dumping on empty properties. And so this community-based organization started organizing around that to clean up the community and prevent the illegal dumping. And a student interned with the organization and then wrote a paper about the history of illegal dumping and what some of the policy solutions were that the city and the state should pursue. It was excellent. The whole piece on eminent domain and how some of the abandoned property should be turned into a park. And, it was an opportunity for kids to connect their real world experience with also real academic skills. So I think what you're describing is exactly right. The line we have to be careful of is that, the Parkland students are advocating for a change in law around guns. And I think one of the things we have to be careful here is that the job of the school isn't to endorse a particular bill or to organize kids to lobby around a particular bill. And I'm not sure we are always as attentive to making sure kids do the sort of perspective taking exercise. And so one of the things I hope teachers will do with kids is give them opportunities to think about the issue from the opposite side of their own, and to say to kids, well, let's have a debate where you're assigned the role to defend the Second Amendment and explain why you're against gun control, and help push kids thinking so that when they leave, they're really prepared to engage as a citizen with people who have different views from their own.
Thank you for all of that. I'm going to try to land this as a question. It may come out as a comment, on which I'd love your reflections. So I work with the Communities for Just Schools Fund. We resource 57 grassroots organizing groups, mostly led by people of color in 20 states around the country, just as a frame. And I think it's been both wonderful and challenging to see the energy and the attention that has been generated since Parkland. And what I mean by that is the Parkland young people are truly phenomenal and amazing. And we happen to resource groups around the country who have provided evidence that they are equally amazing and powerful, and yet they are often erased and invisibilized. And organizers are, every single day, good organizers, and I believe every one of the 57 groups we support are doing good organizing. Organizers are doing action civics. And yes, they're doing them in ways that challenge systems. But I was intrigued by the fact that, you didn't mention organizing as one of the groups that we should be engaging. And it concerns me because I am so excited that this is something that is being lifted up. It is so important. And yet we run the risk, because we need to be careful, because we need to be cautious, further disenfranchising people who have worked hard to demand power where it is consistently and historically denied them. And I think we can do better. Yeah.
A couple thoughts on that. So one thing I give the Parkland kids credit for is that they went to Baltimore and they went to Chicago and they had
Well, they were invited there by Baltimore Algebra Project and Communities United. The invitations came from those groups.
Yeah, but that they saw themselves that they were benefiting from privilege, even though they are also victims of this horrible trauma, and that their privilege was giving them access to these vehicles of communication, and that they were willing to sort of share the mic and intentionally share the mic with kids in Baltimore and Chicago who aren't getting that same platform but are experiencing the consequences of gun violence in other ways. And I appreciate that they, as young people, were aware of the need to create that space. And, Algebra Project in Baltimore doing amazing work. They're one of our partners as well. And, that organizing of young people in communities that have been marginalized is hugely important. To your point about organizing, I think the question for me is organizing around what? And I do think we have to be careful. And so when I think about when I ran the City Project course for my high school students, the folks who were challenging the transfer stations, the illegal dumping, were community organizers. And their organization was a community organizing organization. And they were organizing around that issue, and that issue was not particularly partisan. There are other organizing issues that are more partisan, and I think there is a real danger in putting schools in the position of endorsing a particular partisan agenda. And I think part of what we have to do as folks who care about civic education is help principals and superintendents and school boards get comfortable with the complexity of deciding and not make it seem simple, acknowledge it as hard, and then give them some resources and tools for sorting through this complicated question of what kind of organizing should students be engaged in. And I think there's a real difference between an assignment for a course in which you get a grade versus an extracurricular activity that is approved by the school but led by students versus internship experience that students are choosing for themselves. And we just have to be thoughtful about the differences.
May I offer a really quick reflection response? And is that okay? Okay.
Yes, I
Is that
just
okay?
asked to say, that's all.
Yes, Nick, yes. And again, I'm so grateful, right? We need to be lifting up this conversation, and your leadership is so important on it. I think the Baltimore Algebra Project example is a really great one of the further complexity. So Baltimore Algebra Project a few years ago did work around standing up as an organizing group, standing up against the increase of police in their schools as a result of the police brutality that they were experiencing as young people of color. But they run math programs in schools, and so they rely on their $500,000 budget, they rely on contracts from the schools. And there was actual retaliation on the part of almost all of their high schools where they had contracts to not pay those contracts because they resented the fact that Baltimore Algebra Project was standing in the way of a resource that they felt they needed in a world in which they're under-resourced. And so I just think there's a way in which that's not partisan. It doesn't have to be partisan. We as adults have made it partisan. And so I so agree with you, and I think we can challenge ourselves to define partisanship in a different and new and exciting way, and young people can lead the way for us on that.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to actually ask, I see you talking a bit. I want to make sure that we can transition in case folks want to raise questions that get at a different part of the nexus, but I don't want to transition prematurely. One thing I want to name, because it's directly relevant to what you're mentioning, is that Generation Civics, Generation Citizen, iCivics, Make the Challenge, folks like the Alliance for Youth Action, and other youth organizing groups are coming together to talk about what equity in civics looks like across the spectrum. So that'll be an invitation that will extend more formally later. But precisely what you have mentioned and the complexity that you're talking about is something that will take a bigger table than the one that we have here today and deliberate attention to move. So with that, I want to kind of reopen it. I see you have your question. If you could kind of maybe.
I wanted to, John, with your vast experience working in state, federal, and now in the foundation space, you constantly raise this issue about teachers. I'd like you to expand a little bit more on what we should be doing or looking at in regards to teacher education around the country. You also realize this issue about bipartisanship. And the question becomes, because I've had some conversations on the Hill around this issue of civics, and I've gotten interesting support from Republicans as well as Democrats. They don't see it, but they are very uncomfortable with the issue of how do we do this. So can you share some of your experiences?
Well, so I think part of what's missing in the teacher preparation is not only the time for social studies and civics, but actually the resources. And one of our challenges is because we are very hesitant about centralizing curricular decisions. We tend in teacher preparation to talk in abstractions rather than in sort of the actual content. And it's true of professional development too, right? You gather people for a math professional development, and everybody's using a different math curriculum. So we can't actually talk about the curriculum. We can't talk about what we actually teach. And so we, talk in generalities and put up post-it notes on the wall. We don't get into the meat. And so part of what I would hope states would do is push their teacher preparation programs to actually get into the state's social studies standards with teachers in the relevant grades. So if you're training elementary school teachers, let's dive into the state history course that kids are going to have in 5th grade and figure out, well, how do we do that in a way that both builds knowledge and builds action civics and gives them opportunities to apply their learning. So we also need to do that work with principals, as I know you care about. Principals, I think, often don't get very much preparation around instructional leadership in most principal preparation programs. Again, sort of the abstraction of management as opposed to what does it mean to support teachers in doing civic education and social civic education well. when you go in and observe that social studies teacher, what should you be observing for? What does it look like when kids are doing hands-on learning? And how do you get comfortable with when you give kids these civic skills, they're going to come back to you to ask for things that are going to make you uncomfortable. They're going to tie these 2 points together, right? And it could be uncomfortable, like, why do we have styrofoam trays in the cafeteria? We should stop having styrofoam trays. Or it could be uncomfortable, like, we don't like how the school resource officer treats us at the door in the morning. And what are you going to do about that, right? And so kids do, I think, get empowered. And I think there's a tendency of some school leaders, and true superintendents too, to feel like if kids are asking for something or demanding something, everything's going to spiral out of control. And the fear that things are going to spiral out of control is a real leadership anxiety, and so then people clamp down. And so how do you help leaders develop the leadership skills, the patience, to have some dissonance and some disagreement, and to have hard conversations about what ways they can and cannot be responsive to things that kids are asking for, or parents are asking.
So just a quick time check. We have time for 2 more questions. I'm gonna go here.
Someone's behind.
Thank you so much. This is why we need the wisdom of the room. Here, and then you can.
Sure. Thank you so much for sharing today and for the invitation to come. I'm Sabrina Dent with the Religious Freedom Center. And so one of the things that we do, we've been working on a program called the Georgia 3 R's Project down in Georgia, where we work with 2 public school districts who were in a better position to really, and we teach basically, we educate educators about civic education, specifically about religious liberty, right? And religious literacy in the classroom, and teaching about religion academically, not for conversion purposes, right? So, but then you raised this question about equity. So I'm thinking about down in that project, there was a question around the team, the evaluation team, that asked, we only had a certain demographic that we could work with because other school districts that we went to were not in a position financially to really engage in that type of work, because there are probably school districts that are basically have students where they just need a basic meal, like they have their basic needs that need to be met. So you have this question around equity, right? And you're talking about what needs to be done. What I would like to hear is there an example of a school district that was underfunded, that had some type of state reallocated funds, or however it's done, to really help that school district get the needs that they have? Because ideally, we could talk about what educators should be doing, what resources are available, but if they don't have the funding to be supported for that, then that's a problem. So for me, as a colleague that works with people that does that work down in Georgia, but also as a mom that comes from a school district that was underfunded, and I'm very fortunate to be among those that I have, a tertiary degree, right? But I realize that there's still students there that are still struggling, and that school district is still struggling. So can you give me an example of such where you've seen some type of shift or change to help those districts?
Yeah, so this is something we work on with Education Trust, because the reality is nationally, as we spend about $1,000 more per people on kids from the top income quartile than we do on kids from the bottom income quartile, and that disparity is larger within some states, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, $10,000 difference between high needs and affluent districts. We actually found in our analysis that the racial gap is larger than the income gap. That is, we spend about $1,800 more per student in the districts that have the fewest students of color compared to the districts that have the largest numbers of students of color. And again, those disparities are much wider in some states. So this is a national problem. I would say that states have periods of doing better. So Massachusetts in '93 passed the Massachusetts Education Reform Act. It was sort of a grand bargain where there was commitment to infusion of very significant additional resources targeted to the highest needs districts, along with adoption of higher state standards, new expectations around teacher preparation, a new system of graduation requirements. And that 93 Reform Act ushered in 25 years of progress, such that Massachusetts went from sort of middle of the pack, maybe top third, to being number 1 or 2 in performance. If Massachusetts was allowed to compete with our international competitors on their own without the rest of the country bringing them down, they would be among the top performing countries in the world on their own. Now, it doesn't mean there aren't still disparities in Massachusetts around race and income. So there's still a lot of work to do. But they made a lot of progress by making that investment. Over the last few years, they sort of, there's been some backsliding there. And new dollars are not getting distributed to high needs districts in the same way. So again, it's not just saying Massachusetts is perfect, but there was this period of real progress. New Jersey had a period because of a school finance lawsuit where they put a lot of additional money into their highest need districts. Again, the economy changed, the effort slowed, but there was this period of new dollars. I mean, part of our agenda as a community that cares about civic education should be 3 things. One, you can't separate out the issue of school finance reform from equity in civic education. Because the reality is, you don't have the money, you just can't do it. And I always say to folks that only people who say money doesn't matter are people who have a lot of money. Right? Nobody who's without resources says money doesn't matter, right? So we have to be in the conversation about equitable resources as well. 2, we have to make sure that when there are new dollars, they actually go to things that are going to help on the civic education side. And there's active school finance reform conversations in Massachusetts now, in Maryland, Michigan, in Texas, and the open question if those dollars will be used in ways that actually benefit civic education. So we should be thinking about what that looks like. And then third is, how do we make sure when there are new dollars, they go to civic education and they are equitably distributed? And that low-income kids of color get access to these opportunities. One issue that I think a lot about is English learners. And in many school systems around the country, the students who are English learners do not get access to the things outside of developing English proficiency, which is a shame. I mean, you have kids who, they're in middle school, they're in high school, they are fluent in their home language. There's no reason they shouldn't get social studies in their home language so they can continue to learn social studies or science or math. But instead, with many school districts, they'll say, well, we're just going to wait on all those enrichment things while we focus just on English proficiency. When in fact, what we should be doing is developing kids' skills in both languages and their content knowledge, right? So we also have to be champions for equity in how we think about the use of those.
I've had the privilege of running the challenge for about 3.5 years now, and just in the last couple of months, I've finally come to the realization that when we think about our work, that what is seems to me more important in the Action Civics realm is the process more than the outcome. Like, what's more important to me is that the students get a chance to analyze their community, to think about a root cause of a problem, to do hands-on research, and to think about who is the decision maker they have to get to. But I've noticed all of the adults are more focused on what is the outcome. What do the students get done? Both the teachers and the foundations that want to fund our work. So how do we switch the conversation so that we can have a strong way of evaluating and assessing what students are learning through the process, that then they'll have those skills to go on to community organizing. That if we can do that baseline skill building in schools, then students can choose whatever issue they want to do outside of school, and they'll already know how to do a root cause analysis and to think about a power structure, how do you go to the right person. Yeah. But how do we evaluate and assess that that's the learning that's happening?
Yeah, such a hard question, right? Because some of those things are very hard to measure. A couple observations. I think the International Baccalaureate Program does a better job than some others on building assessment systems where kids are producing research, they are doing analytical writing, and I think we should be thinking about, when we look at state assessments in social studies, when we think about our metrics for civic education learners, what are the kinds of more hands-on assessment mechanisms that we might use to demonstrate that kids' skills have improved, right? I'm quite confident that if you presented kids with a scenario and asked them to explain how they would solve that problem in writing in September, and then in June, after they've been through the MICVA experience, those two pieces of writing would look very different. And that'd be a powerful way to look at how their skills have evolved. So I think one is like, so what are the tools to capture those skills? A second dimension is we should be bold about reminding people how the kind of engagement that kids get through the MICVA experience. You know, thinking about when I was visiting with the MICVA students at
Action Civics Fair,
the Action Civics Fair. Those are kids who want to be in school and are excited about school. In a city where getting kids to actually come to high school is a huge problem. You know, DC, 2 years ago had this huge, or a year and a half ago had this huge scandal about the number of kids who are chronically absent. Kids missing not just 10 days of school or 20 days of school, but 30, 40, 50, 60. And the response from a lot of the policymakers and politicians was, let's figure out who lied in their statistics and let's punish them. As opposed to asking, why is it that kids don't want to be in school? What are we going to do about that? And there are lots of obstacles. Some of them are life obstacles, childcare challenges, transportation challenges. I don't want to make it just about instructional experience. But for sure, there are kids who just don't see something that they are engaged in and care about. And so school isn't compelling to them. That is not true of the MICVA students. We have to help people bridge indicators like chronic absenteeism to interventions like Action Civics as a way to get kids excited about education.
So, I'm gonna let you,
All right,
personalize
make it
question.
quick. So, Larry Pasco, National Council for the Social Studies. So we have this C3 framework that's about 5 years old, and it's supposed to define inquiry in the social studies. And one of the reasons we think Action Civics is very powerful is it defines a dimension of learning at the very end called taking informed action. That learning isn't about term papers that get put in portfolios, but that you do something meaningful. However, you address at the very beginning the tension of content and the fact that now there is an increased attention to the need for content at the early grades. If we were stepping into an elevator with somebody important for 30 seconds, and we had 30 seconds to make the case for why civics, why civic action, how do we help bridge that disconnect between Action Civics programs like it are about the content of social studies come to life, but the content of social studies doesn't come to life without action. How do we, what's the sentence, the message we tie together?
Yeah, it's a great question. So my instinct is always to start with stories, right? So, one story I often tell now when I'm talking about civic education is one of my middle school students when I was a principal is now in the Massachusetts State Legislature. And she will describe how her experiences in middle school helped prepare her to be in the state legislature. And so I think it's helping people understand that, yes, there's a set of things you have to know, and I think everyone agrees on that. But their value is tied up with can you then use them to do something that makes a difference in the world. And helping make that real for people. The other example I sometimes use, often folks who maybe are on the more progressive side of the political spectrum, is around Black Lives Matter. And then when Black Lives Matter started, people were mad about police violence, but actually not very clear about what to do about it next. Stop it, but not very clear about the mechanism. And I can remember President Obama talking with activists saying like, as the president, I'm not the one who decides what's in the police contract. I'm not the one who decides whether or not to prosecute an officer in a situation. There are things I can do at the federal level, but activists, you ought to be asking questions at the local level if you want to make change. And now when you look across the country, you see the election of these district attorneys who are changing the approach not only to police violence, but rethinking the policies of mass incarceration at the local level. Right? That was partly about activism. It was also about knowing, this goes back to the point about what students learn to make, but it was knowing who do you go to, who's actually in charge of this thing and can make the change. And those are the kinds of stories, I think, that help people understand how you marry the action with the knowledge. And you really can't have one without the other and have it be effective.
I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us for this fireside chat on Action Civics. Can we put our hands together for a second? I also would be remiss, our CEO and co-founder Scott Warren was not able to be present, but he has recently written a book called The Power of Youth in Our Politics. And I think we've seen in so many ways throughout this conversation that when young folks lift up their voice and get engaged in our political systems, they can make a tremendous difference, not only in Parkland, but we mentioned Baltimore, Chicago, we might point to other areas. So from him to you, from us to you, this is a gift.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for the conversation. Thanks for what you're doing.
Have a great day.